All right. So welcome again to Twin Ports Climate Conversations. Today's talk will be on Lincoln Park, Duluth, a neighborhood equity approach to resilience. My name is Madison Rodman, and I'll be your facilitator for this conversation today, and I'm a resilience extension educator with Minnesota Sea Grant. We're really excited to have Jody Slick, founder and CEO of Equilibrium 3 here today. She will be presenting and we'll have time for question and answers as well. I also want to take a moment to thank those groups and individuals that are involved with making Twin Ports climate conversations happen. So they include Wisconsin Sea Grant, the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, the 1854 Treaty Authority, Minnesota's Lake Superior Coastal Program at the Minnesota DNR, NOAA's Office for Coastal Management, and Minnesota Sea Grant. The Twin Ports Climate Conversations has a broad mission, and briefly, it encompasses helping to aid and improve climate change conversation, communication skills for all, climate change related data collection and sharing, helping to motivate and support community-based adaptation, increasing climate change conversations in more sectors to help broaden our impact. And a new mission item is to include and consider climate justice in each conversation when possible. And we invite you, as you listen to our presentation today, to think about our mission and how we can contribute our collective ideas and efforts as we work together as a community to build resilience. I also want to share that we have now 20 or so recordings from the last few years, and so I'll post a link where we can share previous recordings from Twin Ports Climate Conversations, and we invite you to look at those at your leisure. And there's some great presentations that we hope you check out. And then during our presentation today, we'd like you to use that Q&A feature, and that feature will allow us to relay questions to our presenter. And without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and introduce our presenter for today. So we are very pleased to have with us Jody Slick, the founder and CEO of Equilibrium 3. Jody has many years experiencing developing social, environmental, and economic programs. And she has led a variety of projects, including community scale energy efficiency, building material reuse and recycling, disaster recovery, climate action, and pandemic response. Jody's work has been recognized by the White House Champions of Change Award for building resilient communities, the Climate Showcase Seeds of Change Award from the US EPA, and the Main Street America's Forward Award. With that, I really welcome Jody, and I will pass the baton to Jody for her presentation today. So thank you so much for being here, Jody.
Great, thank you. And if you could launch that poll, that would be awesome, Madison.
Yes, so we're going to start with a little poll of how familiar you are with Equilibrium 3. So that should be showing up on your screen, and you can share with Jody how familiar you are with this organization. Okay, we're getting some results come in, Jody. Looks like we have a mix. Got a biggest fan in the audience. Some people that are saying who, some people that have participated in programs. So I'll give it a few more seconds for folks to vote, but a nice mix of folks. We're so glad you all are here. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. Do you think we've got it?
I think so, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'm gonna share my screen to start off today. Just double check that you're seeing that, Madison.
Looks great. Thanks, Jody.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Equilibrium 3, but then really kind of dig into the idea of kind of this moment in time and what that means as we think about environmental justice communities, climate, we think about health disparities, etc. Equilibrium 3 is a Duluth-based, just wait 1 second. There we go. There we go. Equilibrium 3 is a Duluth-based nonprofit organization. We're actually reaching our 10th anniversary October 1st. And we were a spin-off of a previous social enterprise that did green affordable housing construction and deconstruction services here in Duluth. When the social enterprise's parent nonprofit merged 10 years ago, Equilibrium 3 kind of spun off to really work in the space of equity and our sustainable future. Sometimes we talk about working at the intersection of energy equity and economic vitality. The first program that we actually started, and this was even before Equilibrium 3 was a thing, we were Common Ground construction, is we started a program called the Duluth Energy Efficiency Program. And that launched during the time of stimulus and ARA funds back in 2008, 2009. And the idea was that with all of the different investments that we're going to be going into, especially things like energy efficiency and kind of the start of energy transition, we looked at what were kind of the biggest needs that we had in the city of Duluth. And at the time, they were talking about energy efficiency block grant funds. So there was the thought that there was going to be potentially $6 billion that were going to be sent to communities for investment in communities. And I actually was tapped at the time to help the Duluth Mayor's Office answer a survey that was put together by the U.S. Council of Mayors about what energy projects do you have in your community that are shovel ready. And interestingly enough, Duluth has an amazing ability to say, you know what, if you send us money, we'll make sure something is shovel ready. The U.S. Council of Mayors did this survey, and it ended up that per person or per capita, Duluth had the largest list of shovel ready projects. But not all of those projects, I would say, were necessarily real. When I talked with community stakeholders, there were lots of ideas as to how energy money could be spent in this community, from adding wind turbines on top of our buildings downtown because people had seen the pilot project that St. Louis County had done, to large solar installs and all of that. And the reality is that if we look at Duluth, one of our biggest energy challenges is the fact that we've got very, very old housing stock. But it's much more difficult to spend $2,000 or $3,000 per home and work, on things like energy efficiency than it is to perhaps drop $1 million on a large energy project. And so we started the Duluth Energy Efficiency program, which received some stimulus dollars. And the biggest thing that we needed to look at that time was, why, if doing energy efficiency improvements are good for your local economy, it's good for your house, it's good for your health, it creates jobs, it saves dollars, it saves our climate, why isn't that work being done? And what we found is that there were some very specific barriers that people were facing. They didn't honestly know what they needed to do for their homes. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know who could do it. They didn't know if it was would be done right. And so nationally, even people that went so far as to get an energy audit a decade ago, less than 2% actually took that knowledge and turned it into some sort of energy or climate saving action. And so we created the Duluth Energy Efficiency Program around the idea of helping people figure out those 4 questions. And our model was creating a third-party project management system. We would do a combined audit, not one that's just telling you electrical information or just telling you natural gas information. We would do one audit that would prioritize the things that you should do based on return on investment that was fuel neutral. Then we actually helped people put their homes and their projects out for bid if they were going to use a contractor, or work with teaching them the skills if they were going to do it themselves. We provided basically the financial landscape to make sure that somebody wasn't missing a rebate maybe from one of the utilities, or getting funding because perhaps they were low income or because they were doing something like a furnace. And then finally, we provided kind of that third party quality assurance and could help people when they had questions that maybe they weren't getting answered from their contractor, something along those lines. And we thought it was a really important approach because we recognize, again, as an organization that works on sustainability and equity, that those in our community that are paying the most for energy are often those that can least afford it. Because it is our low income that often live in our oldest homes, our oldest, leakiest homes, et cetera. And we know as a community, we already have issues with affordability. This is an example in Duluth that somebody working at minimum wage can only afford about $513 for their rent on a particular month. But in Duluth, your average one bedroom goes for $670. So there's already what we consider this idea of being cost burden, and energy just makes that worse. And in fact, when we talk about energy affordability, we're talking about you shouldn't be spending more than 6% of your gross income on energy. But some in St. Louis County, our lowest income people, can spend more than 37%. And even with federal programs like low-income heating assistance, et cetera, we find that for those that are eligible, only about a third of kind of that affordability gap is actually covered in St. Louis County. We also know that when we're talking about, the phrase our most marginalized individuals, that this is an area that is squarely an equity area, as African American households, elderly households, et cetera, face the highest energy burden compared to the nation. What we weren't anticipating when we started the Duluth Energy Efficiency Program is how that would lead us down an even kind of broader resilience path in our community. We had received ARA funding, and as part of that, we were able to actually provide added grants to people to accomplish their energy efficiency work. And then in June of 2012, we had this small little rain event, or as the case may be, not so small rain event. And it happened to hit about 6 weeks before all of our stimulus work was supposed to be done. And all of a sudden we were like in panic mode. We, at the time that the floods happened in June of 2012, we had about 300 individual energy efficiency projects that needed to finish up in the next 6 weeks. And all of a sudden, we started triaging as an organization, recognizing that some people who were supposed to finish projects, doing that work was going to be the furthest thing from their mind, recognizing that there were others who will have lost their mechanical systems in the flood. And so they weren't even on our radar. And now that there was this huge need for them to do that work, et cetera. So as an organization, we started a meeting where we were thinking about how do we make sure we continue to make our program happen, especially during these next 6 weeks. And we left that meeting understanding that, especially when there wasn't individual assistance to help families recover from the flood, that what a community would need to rebuild after a disaster was exactly the work that we had been doing. You needed somebody to go and assess and kind of create a scope of work for recovery. You needed people to figure out where all the different resources could come from to make the repairs to homes. You needed to either help people hire contractors or find volunteers or do the work themselves. And there's this important aspect of, was it done right? And so we ended up taking on the lead role for disaster recovery in the community, basically rapidly retooling our Duluth Energy Efficiency Program to help with flood rebuilding. Because of our work on the energy efficiency side, and remember, this is 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, when a lot of the federal policies actually said that you had to replace things the way they were. So instead of what is the very popular phrase now, the Build Back Better, a lot of the policies around disaster assistance, just 10 years ago were actually like, build back as bad as it was before. And that meant that, for example, if you had a household that could have been in a situation of having no flood damage whatsoever, if they had their landscape properly tilted away from their foundation, if they were able to deal with some bulk water because they had gutters and downspouts and downspout extenders, etc. If that was not part of their home previously, you actually couldn't add those things. So one of the pieces of work that we ended up doing was being able to work with one of our local foundations, so that seeing as it took so long for some of the state aid to kind of hit the table, because regionally we were appealing FEMA's decision for individual assistance. What we ended up doing is we ended up providing bridge loans so that we could help people get their heat and water and those kind of critical items going. And then when the state aid came in, we actually repaid that bridge loan, and then we were able to invest $5,000 per home in resilience items like increasing energy efficiency, dealing with some of that bulk water, etc. And from that is what we had received our White House recognition for. It also meant that we spent time talking with and working with hundreds of families, and also kind of better understanding some of the community systems that were in place. And so in 2014 and 15, when the federal government announced the HUD's National Disaster Resilience Competition, we ended up taking kind of leadership and putting together what would end up being the state of Minnesota's application. And what that was kind of determining in the state of Minnesota what was the area that was most impacted and most distressed, that had unmet recovery needs. And from that, we really defined with the state and a whole bunch of partners this area really from the hillside, through kind of the western corridor of Duluth, which is also where we have concentrations of poverty in our community. We also worked on then the creation of what became the formula for the comprehensive community resilience for that particular area. And the basic formula there was, and nothing that's going to kind of surprise some of you that are maybe familiar with ideas of theories of change and co-benefits, et cetera. But across 5 different domains, which was housing, resources, often meaning water, our economy, energy, and food actually got changed to the larger concept of health. What is the existing situation? What are the interventions that we need to put in place? And once we've done that, what do we get out of it? Where are the spaces in which we can create some additional benefits? And then as we do that work, is it work that is replicable? Is it something that's scalable, et cetera? In the end, we did not, or the state of Minnesota did not receive one of the HUD grants. But as an agency, we've continued to kind of employ that methodology of looking at things. And we've done that, for example, on the energy side. In addition to, of course, the energy efficiency work, in the last 10 years, we've begun more and more on the energy transition side of things. And partners and partnerships we've been able to create, and the work that so many different agencies are doing in our community are dynamic. One of the things that we ended up doing is we received some funding from the Department of Energy under the Solar Market Pathways program. And that actually allowed us, again, kind of taking that same approach that we have for DEEP, what are the gaps? How do you use design thinking to move a nascent solar market where a lot of people don't believe solar energy really even works for us up north, into something that is viable and over time reaching a deeper penetration. And so we worked under the solar market pathways to look at design from a individual household that's looking at solar to commercial and industrial to utility scale, and then also looking at solar community gardens. Because we're in a different type of regulatory environment here, for those of you that aren't necessarily from up north, maybe you're in the Excel territory, we actually have where individuals that are in the Excel territory have about 1,000 times more access to community solar than we do up north here. One of the projects that we did, and I am just amazed and grateful that there are people that do this, but we worked with UMD, U-Spatial, to actually create a solar map so that instead of having to have a contractor go out and do physical site inspections of all of these different places, where maybe they do 100 of them and only one person would end up buying solar. So to some extent, that one person got to pay for all of the other 99 site visits, or where you'd have to, even if you want to find out if you want solar, maybe you'd have to pay $200 or $300 just to have that site visit. We created a tool where you could just go online. And this is one of those examples in which I think we were about the second place in the US to have this particular tool available. But it was only possible because UMD and their geospatial folks worked with their interns to actually digitize 60,000 building footprints. To make this happen. And now that work has been done, it's something that's useful in lots of different spaces besides just our solar map. And if you're curious and you're in Duluth, you can go onto our website and check out your own rooftop. We also did things like a national demonstration project to look at with the Hartley Nature Center that had some kind of first generation type panels. How we could actually install or redo the inverters on those panels and at the same time add battery storage. So it was one of the first solar plus storage demonstration projects in the US, and we put that together actually as a training for electricians and utility workers. And interestingly enough, this is one of those climate disaster, timing is everything, and we missed it by that much type of situations. In fact, the person, Brett Pence, who worked for us at the time that was leading this particular project, he had actually brought his headlamp to work the day the battery to Hartley was being delivered. Because it was being delivered while Hartley still was without power after the windstorms that had hit especially hard up in the Woodland Kenwood area. Fortunately, power came on about, I think, an hour before the battery ended up being delivered. But it was a great example of being able to kind of look at different business cases for adding storage where one might not necessarily think of it. Unfortunately, it wasn't installed until after they were without power, I think for a week to 10 days. We've also worked with a number of organizations as different options come up, like the Low Income Solar Program that Minnesota Power had, reaching out to say, hey, this program is available. We think that your site could be a great location for that. How can we work with you to get an application in? And then are there other ways in which we can support the development of a project? And this, of course, is on the Jamaji building at American Indian Community Housing Organization. And then finally, one of the ways that we've looked at it, and again, using this formula of what exists, what intervention can we do, and how can that, turn the world into rainbows and unicorns. We were able to create a low-income solar community garden that you now see as you come in on I-35. It's a 40 kilowatt array, and there's actually two beneficiaries of the power that comes out of there. The first is a quarter of the power goes to support the Duluth Veterans Place, which is long-term affordable housing and transitional housing for veterans. And then the second is to support energy efficiency work and kind of emergency energy funding for households that are facing disconnection. We didn't get the National Disaster Resilience Competition award, which meant that we lost out on $72 million worth of funding, because that's what that total application was. But we got probably one of the sweetest consolation prizes in the history of the world. And that was we got a letter from HUD that said, "Too bad, so sad, but we have 2 AmeriCorps Vistas that we can give the state of Minnesota to further your resilience work." And in the end, that was work that the state of Minnesota, even though they were the applicant, they're like, "We don't know what to do with 2 vistas." And so we work with the city of Duluth saying, "Okay, well, our consolation prize is 2 vistas. You can take 1, we'll take 1. And, you know, it might not compensate for a year and a half of community planning and work and all of that kind of stuff, but, you know, it's something." So then we asked the federal VISTA program, well, how do we access our 2 vistas? And they basically said, well, you apply for the program, which means in order to get the 2 vistas that HUD promised us, we actually had to go through a federal application project or process. That was 5 years ago. We did so, and we actually then launched the ECO3 VISTA program, which now means that we have 41 full-time VISTA positions that are placed out at 27 different organizations. And so in a way, the idea, we didn't necessarily get the funds to do projects, but we are now at a point in which we are bringing in considerable capacity to advance every one of those resilience domains that we talked about. And so we have vistas that have, from a climate side, been doing everything from helping kind of do some pre-design and community outreach work that has resulted in the first 2-way protected bike lane in the community, to outreach to lots of different community members so we can better understand kind of next step design for the solar garden site, as well as really look at storm resilience, water flow through our community, interest in green infrastructure, transportation, climate aspects, to doing things like design sessions, specifically with community members, that resulted in the solar garden that you saw previously, to actually rapidly creating in an indoor football field a micro factory to assemble 225,000 face shields with over 1,000 community volunteers in order to get PPE when it wasn't really available out to our frontline workers, as well as basically freeing up talented sewers in our community so that they can make masks, so that we could distribute them to community members that needed masks. This was a project a year ago that was absolutely a huge project and amazing, and was totally possible because we lost out on the HUD funding. We also have worked on things like creating community resources, the guides for food during the pandemic, working on you know, kind of the best form of construction, and that is taking a condemned blighted house and converting that into housing. And maybe most important to this particular group is it's really through a lot of the capacity of our vistas that we were able to work with lots of different environmental organizations and citizens in Duluth to create the Duluth Citizens Climate Action Plan, which not only kind of benchmarks the information that a citizen would need to be more engaged in climate work, but it looks at things kind of through some of our most important domains like transportation, housing, food, but it breaks it down into what can you individually learn, what can you individually do, how can you engage and work for businesses and community organizations that are engaging in this space, and then finally, where and how can you use your advocacy power to help move our governmental institutions towards deeper climate action. And this also can be found on the Equilibrium 3 website. It is just absolutely dynamic, and I encourage you to take some time there. One of the other things that we really learned, and the rest of my presentation today is on this, is that if we're going to be framing resilience, we need to understand it's really, really, really complicated, and it needs an integrated approach. And that oftentimes when something is so complicated, when you need to be looking at that integrated approach, the larger your scale, the less likely you are to actually get to action and get to impact. And so figuring out that complexity at a small target area not only can then have positive impact in that small area, but it can inform our larger strategies. And now is really the time to do that. And that brings us to a lot of the work that we're doing in our home, which is in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Duluth, Minnesota. And some of you are probably familiar with Lincoln Park, but for a little bit of I guess, place setting, no pun intended. Lincoln Park is the Duluth neighborhood that actually is the geographic east-west center of Duluth. We talk about Lincoln Park really being from rocks. So the point of rocks, which separates the neighborhood from downtown. So rocks to docks, which is the iron ore docks that you drive under as you're coming in or leaving Duluth down I-35. From Skyline Parkway to the shoreline, and it's port inclusive. And I wanted to show a couple of different, I guess, images of the neighborhood, because as we think about environmental justice, and I'll tell you more about our story there, there's been a couple of things that have happened over the years that I think really do tell the story about how we can have marginalized and forgotten neighborhoods. One of those is that when the city of Duluth actually passed down at the state legislature that they could use their tourism tax dollars to really do the St. Louis River corridor initiative, which was this idea that any other place in the world, if we didn't have Lake Superior, Duluth would be this amazing river community. But the river side of Duluth has often been forgotten. So what we're going to do is we're going to start focusing on the river. Interestingly enough, and I really wanted to kind of like highlight where we are, and I don't know if you can see my pointer or not, but I love this image from space. Because when the state definition of what is the St. Louis River corridor was created, they actually leapfrogged over the Lincoln Park neighborhood right here and started the definition of the river as 34th Avenue West, which basically is where the docks are. So we kind of went from Lake Superior is a focus community. We're going to leapfrog over our lowest income neighborhood and then focus on the river being kind of what's west of there. And much to the credit of the mayor at the time, once this was kind of pointed out, they sent their lobbyists back the next year to change that definition to actually say that we are a river community. But it seems like when we think about environmental justice, our shoreline is all working waterfront. It's where we have the sewer treatment plant. It's where we have the port. It's where we have, bulk storage, et cetera. But if you look at the amount of shoreline in Lincoln Park, you have almost 11 miles if you go in and out of every strip, and you have about 5 miles if you don't do that. So we need to be seen as a river neighborhood, and have kind of water as part of our identity. Other aspects that we need to be thinking about, and Lincoln Park as part of the Lincoln Park story, is that if you were to think about where I'm sitting right now, which is in the lower portion of Lincoln Park, we call it Lincoln Park 156. That's the census tract that's on the kind of bottom of the hill here. We actually have a situation in which our residents in this census tract are in the lowest 0.5% for life expectancy for all Minnesotans. And so what that means is that means that on average, those in Lincoln Park 156 die on average at age 69, instead of much older in the 80s, low 80s for the rest of the state. And that situation of that 12-year life expectancy disparity can actually increase to up over 20 years based on race. And, as we think about, how we're going to address climate, as we think about all of the disparities and challenges, we need to be focusing on a neighborhood like Lincoln Park. Otherwise, we're talking about equity, but we're not actually acting on it. And this slide shows kind of some of the other pieces that can be part of some of our design approaches as we think about climate, as we think about environmental justice, as we think about health, as we think about economic and educational disparities. All of that really wraps together for the success of this neighborhood. And when we think about environmental justice, health disparities, and even things like COVID-19, one thing you'll see kind of at the bottom here is that our residents are experiencing a 1.5 times greater loss of life of a family or friend, and are 5 times greater loss of housing in compared to the rest of the region. And we do have, almost a full quarter of our residents are disabled. And so when we think about climate solutions, like transportation solutions, this is a neighborhood that is much more dependent on whether or not those solutions are implemented well than other places in which there may be households with multiple vehicles, et cetera. I'm going to talk about kind of 4 different areas of challenge and opportunity as we think about this moment in time. And one of the first ones is looking at food and food access. If you look at Duluth and certain categories of poverty, whether or not people have access to a vehicle, are there grocery stores and kind of variety of food, et cetera. You'll see, and it's kind of a weird map because these are our census tracts. So Lincoln Park is really here on this map. Lincoln Park is not only kind of a USDA food desert, but it would be considered our high priority food areas because we'd be looking at a number of different things. So one of the pieces that we're looking at is how do we use kind of existing community assets to address this. And one of those ways in which we're doing that is we're now working and managing space up at Lake Superior College. That was their living lab for their eco-entrepreneurship program, and working through how the ag resources up there can serve our community. Another thing that we're working on with partners is the redevelopment of the Lincoln Park Community Center. And we hope to actually be able to place a small footprint grocery store there, as well as being able to modify a commercial kitchen there, so we can do a lot more on kind of food growing, access issues, etc. This is also a project in which we're working on establishing a resilience hub, so that 99.9% of the time, neighborhood resources and neighborhood community building is available there. But at the time of disaster, there would be resilient power and ways in which this site could continue to serve community. We're also working on transportation. I had mentioned earlier that one of our vistas actually helped us and the city get to a point in which we've been able to now open the first two-way protected bike lane, which is very excited, but it's a temporary detour. So continuing to look at how we model some of that stuff out in this community where there have been those challenges before. I suggest that when we have 40% of our residents that don't have access to a car, these are the exact type of communities we should be building our best complete streets infrastructure. And that, from an environmental justice point of view, again, is another one of our kind of definitions. Lincoln Park 156 actually hosts all of the Twin Ports interchange, which I think we were told by MnDOT at one point represents 1.6% of the bridge deck surfaces in Minnesota. There's that much heavy highway infrastructure here. And so we're dealing with the emissions that come from that infrastructure. We're now going to be dealing with years of construction disrupting our neighborhood. And again, 40% of those in Lincoln Park 156 that host all of this infrastructure don't even have access to a vehicle. It's much like we don't have a food access, but in our neighborhood, we have 9 different businesses that often lead the list of like the places you need to go in Minnesota for food and drink. And we're also, host the Duluth port that ships 1 million tons of food per year, but our residents don't have access. We do things in our community, like we have some free circulator buses. They don't go to our neighborhood. And so those that need the access the most are the ones that have to pay for it and have less opportunity. And the DTA is working on the Better Bus blueprint, so we're hoping to have some movement here. We're challenged with some of the parking infrastructure that we don't have, some of the clean energy infrastructure we don't have. This is Canal Park. We'd love to see these type of assets in our neighborhood. We've spent, for those of you here in Duluth, millions, I think, on this particular bridge. But if we want to look at how our neighborhood is connected to things like recreation areas, the Lake Walk, jobs, the 2.5 million tourists that go to Canal Park, etc. This is our bridge. This is our connection. And one of our business owners described it as the perfect bridge to connect 2 prison yards. I think we can do better if we start centering on equity and justice in our communities. This is part of that infrastructure that's not right now part of the Can of Worms project. It needed to be the replacement of this, which is Highway 53, needed to be delayed because of the amount of contamination that was found under the main Can of Worms infrastructure. Right now, there's a park and some other assets that are under here. This is an opportunity as an EJ neighborhood to envision what could serve our community. But this is one of those things that we run into where, the DOT is responsible for building the roads. There aren't necessarily the resources to help us engineer what the solution would be in which this space could really serve as a community asset. And the last kind of little bit that I'm going to mention that we need to be paying attention to as we think about climate, as we think about environmental justice, is a little bit of a lessons learned. I showed you earlier pictures from the flood of 2012. A lot of the flood damage that occurred in our community wasn't because of lake flooding or the riverine flooding. It really was because of our vertical waterways. And Miller Creek that goes through Lincoln Park is amazing creek. It's beautiful. It's really a regionally important and historic park, as well as a trout stream, etc. But what we see is that there are differentials in who has resources and how connected people are to the outdoors, to each other, etc. When the flood happened, the day after the flood, there were almost 200 people that organically showed up in Chester Creek to see what they could do to help the park there, as the flood had of course damaged that park. That same type of I guess outpouring did not happen in Lincoln Park. And in fact, it was one of those things that, with all of the different things that the city was managing, et cetera, initially the damage that occurred in this park was actually left off of the FEMA work sheet. And so much to the city's credit, they have done a huge amount of planning work. They've been able to obtain state and federal and philanthropic dollars, et cetera, to redo this park. But we've actually had a 5-year delay in this project. And the biggest kind of tranche of dollars that would be going into this was really about environmental justice communities. But we ended up getting set back because we had a property owner start to kind of argue with what was going to be happening in this park. And that was somebody who had bought a second home along the parkway, actually ended up getting consulting party status, and has caused, years of delay. And so that 5-year-old in the neighborhood that should have had improved green space is now 10. And interestingly enough, that kind of part-time second home owner has actually just sold that home. And so caused this delay for those that are living in the neighborhood full-time. And so we have to be watching kind of where and how we give power in these processes as we're dealing with climate and environmental justice. And to that note, I just want to call your attention. I love this particular chart. It is by facilitating power. We often talk about how do we engage community, and there really is a spectrum there. And our efforts are to try to move as far over to the right here, in which we can build power and build the voice of the residents in our community, and not only have, not even just have Eco3 kind of serve as a proxy for their voice. And with that being said, I want to invite you this Saturday. We're actually doing a fall party, which will be here at the future Lincoln Park Resilience Hub. We're going to be doing a stone soup lunch, which will have some soup prepared by some of that from some of the food that has been grown up at the Lake Superior College Farm. We're going to have some plant giveaways. We're doing an interactive watershed demonstration. We're going to be kicking off the Stormwater Chalk Fest. There'll be some community design questions. And this will be kind of our final design session for some work that we've done, thanks to the DNR and NOAA, on engaging with the community to help design kind of next steps for the solar garden, along with some other community space. So check it out. Love to see you. If you're interested, we have worked with a number of state and national organizations on our website. You can check out that Duluth Shines map, along with some of the reports that we've done, either on local food, community engagement, climate, resilience, etc. And that is the end. I want to say thank you to everybody. And then I'm guessing Madison may have a couple of questions for me.
Yes, thanks so much, Jody. Let's give Jody a virtual round of applause from everybody here in the audience. Thank you so much for sharing your important work with our community of folks that gather here monthly at Twin Ports Climate Conversations. I'm going to invite anyone that's attending to use that question and answer feature, that Q&A feature, to type a question, and I will relay it to Jody. And you're getting some thanks in the chat. And one question I'm going to start off with as folks are typing in their questions is maybe for those people that had never heard of Equilibrium 3 until this meeting, what's the best way for folks to stay informed? And then if they're interested, involved with the work that you're doing, is there one way you can direct people, or what's the best way to stay kind of up to date with all of your important projects going on?
Sure. If you go to our website, equilibrium3.org, you can actually sign up for our contact list and kind of tell us why you're interested, and we'll keep you connected in those particular ways. And then, of course, you know, like most organizations out there, we do have the Facebook and social media and all of that fun stuff.
Perfect. Thanks, Jody. So I'll make sure to put that link to the equilibrium3.org website in the chat for everyone. I will remind you, Jody shared a bunch of really great resources. We do a follow-up email. So if you are here today, you will get an email, and we'll make sure to compile all the resources, the Duluth Shines map, the Citizen Climate Action Plan, to share with you all in case you haven't seen those before. So I'll start with a question. This is kind of speaking to the can of worms and highway redevelopment projects. So how much of that project right now is considering non-vehicle connection between Lincoln Park and other communities in Duluth, if at all? So if you can speak to that.
Yeah, so the base can of worms, or Twin Ports interchange reconstruction, is actually about motorized vehicles, and specifically it's also about enhancing so that freight can move in and out of the port, because a lot of the bridges that make up the can of worm were load restricted, and there were some traffic hazard issues with left exits and blind entrances and all of that. And then even some geometry issues in which it was hard for some loads to be able to come in and out of the port. So the base Twin Ports interchange is about that. The one thing that we were able to accomplish is that because they're going to be rerouting some traffic onto Lower Michigan Street, that meant that the Cross City Trail needed to be temporarily repositioned for 3 years. So we have been able, through the city, through MnDOT funding, and through our community work, to be able to say, okay, well, that's a perfect opportunity for us to test out more enhanced non-car focused transportation. So that is the two-way protected bike lane, as well as the DTA, testing out some of the aspects of what they would call bus rapid transit. So, and that is some additional planning that the DTA is hoping to get some federal funds for, to look at the potential of making bus rapid transit, which is kind of like using buses along the lines of what you might do with light rail, make that more possible into the future for a couple of key corridors, like what goes through Lincoln Park.
Excellent, thank you. So if you're typing a question, now's a great time to submit it so I can ask it. Otherwise, we'll just keep rolling along with some other questions we've got here. So you mentioned the Duluth Citizens Climate Action Plan. So is there anything that's coming up next, or a result from that work that you can share with our community of folks? So next steps on that, or kind of next phases, or any kind of ways that folks could engage with that particular plan?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is that in the Citizens Climate Action Plan, as you go through there, again, it's what do you need to know, and kind of have that located within Duluth's climate footprint, et cetera, actions you can take and how you can get engaged. And I think one of the key things that we would say is important right now is that this is really about how citizens can get engaged. That one of the things that citizens can do to get engaged is, as the city now develops and evolves kind of the city of Duluth's climate action plan, there's lots of kind of opportunities to make sure that that plan, which will be both kind of about the corporate city as well as kind of the broader community, are reflective of the climate needs, realities, equity focuses, etc.
Thank you so much, Jody. And so I'm going to stall for a tiny bit to see if there's one more question that comes in. But for now, I would like to give you a wholehearted thank you for presenting and sharing with us today, for the folks that are on online live with us, and then the folks that will be reviewing this as a recording. I just shared a link to a place where people could check out our past TPCC recordings. And then if you found us here today and you're not yet on our mailing list, I'm going to share a link of how to sign up to be on that mailing list so you can come to our next TPCC, which they're always held the third Tuesday of the month from noon to 1 Central Time. So there's a link to sign up for future notices of our events. So if you've done the math, our next event will be on October 19th from noon to 1. We can't quite release what that topic will be yet, but we look forward to seeing you there. And I don't see any more questions come in, Jody. So again, a virtual round of applause from our audience members today. And thank you so much for sharing your activities with us. And yes, we have some thank yous coming in the chat. So everyone always enjoys hearing you talk, Jody, and an excellent summary of ECO3 activities. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again at the next Twin Ports Climate Conversations.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.